Today we will be taking T-notes on cells and chromosomes. Now you probably already know what a cell is. We've learned this before in past years about the cells being the building blocks of all living organisms. These could be plants or animals. And there are millions of cells within each organism. And in those cells, there are many working parts that have specific roles in order to replicate, to build, to grow. And it is the cell that holds the genetic material that makes each of us individual and unique. Here is an animal cell, and next to it is a simplistic version of a plant cell. Obviously, there are a lot of other organelles inside of the cells, but the ones that we're going to focus on are the ones that come into play with genetics. So inside of the cell, you see this black circle, and this is the nucleus. The nucleus is the control center of every cell. It contains the genetic material. A chromosome is located inside the nucleus, and in this chromosome, it contains a large number of genes that are in the form of a string of DNA. Here is one example of a chromosome, and notice how there is a yellow portion and a blue portion. Together they are joined, making one chromosome pair. DNA is a chemical that carries that genetic material which is found in the chromosome. So if you look here we have the chromosome pair, and they are joined right here. But if you were to take a look inside of this chromosome, it would have this DNA, which we all know to be a helical shape. Taking a closer look at chromosome, remember we did say that it was a string of genetic material. It was a string of DNA. So what happens is, notice that we have the DNA in the double helix form. These are all wrapped around, coiled around, and around and around. So it's stuffing all of this DNA into tight coils, which is then smushed together into what we know as the chromosome. Now remember that a chromosome has two parts that are joined right in the center. So if you look down here, we see this little picture here where it has an orange chromosome and a red chromosome, and those together create what we call a homologous pair. So it is a pair of matched chromosomes, one coming from the father and one coming from the mother. So we call this a paternal chromosome and a maternal chromosome. They are identical in size, shape, and the position of the genes. The only exception is with sex chromosomes, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But when you look at it, it makes sense because this is why sex cells only have half the genetic material. In order to make an embryo, you have to have a sperm cell, which is the paternal, and the egg cell, which is maternal. And when they join, they create a homologous pair. So we already know that a chromosome is just genetic material that is packed very tightly into these pairs here that looks like a little X. Within these sections of DNA are called genes. There are about 25,000 genes within a human. And every cell has two versions of each gene. Remember, one paternal, one maternal. That gene is transcripted for a particular trait, and it is always found around the same area of the chromosome. So notice here you see these little bars, and within here there are sections of the DNA which has a particular trait. For example, maybe this is where your eye color would be found, or this might be even part of what dictates how tall you are. And over here, notice that there are different genes within the DNA that will determine various other characteristics of that species. If we're able to map out all of the genes of one species, we would then have the sum total of those genes of that species, and we call that the genome. An allele is an alternate form of a particular gene when chromosomes are in pairs. So here we have a pair of chromosomes. Remember how we said that genes are sections of DNA and they're always found in the same, relatively same area on the chromosome? Well, there can be differences, and this is what causes variation. This is why we have blue eyes and another person might have brown eyes. Or in the case of a flower, this is why maybe the flower is purple instead of white. So an allele is just an alternate form of a particular gene when the chromosomes are in pairs. So here we have a flower that has a paternal and a maternal chromosome. But in the same section that would dictate what color the flower is, it is carrying a gene that shows for purple, and then it also is carrying a gene for white. And this plays into part why some flowers are able to produce purple flowers and white flowers. And that is because on the chromosomes, they carry both genes for those colors. When we take into account that this is a chromosomal pair, these two can interact, and either one is dominant, and if in this case purple is dominant, even if it has a gene for white flowers, it would show as purple. Other times, maybe it could be the other way around. White might be dominant, purple is recessive. Sometimes it could even be where it's a mixture and you get a variation. When you have a purple and a white allele, it comes out to be a hybrid or some other kind of variation. And so because of these alleles and all of the different kinds of alleles that exist, possibly with color, you can get a multitude of variations amongst the same species. Here's another example. We have 3 different chromosomes, and in the area that you see in color, which is a blue or a brown, and this is true for all 3 chromosome pairs, we have an allele for blue eyes, which is a recessive trait, and we also have an allele for brown eyes. On this particular chromosomal pair, this one is heterozygous, which means that the person, if the brown eyes are dominant, this person here would have brown eyes. Over here, we have 2 alleles that happen to be the same color. So of course, this person, homozygous, will have brown eyes. Over here, on this last chromosomal pair, we have 2 alleles for the recessive trait, and this person has homozygous recessive and will show blue eyes. How many chromosomes do organisms have? Every organism has a different number of chromosomes. For example, humans have 46 chromosomes, or 23 pairs. Corn, on the other hand, has 20 chromosomes, or 10 pairs. The only exception is with sex chromosomes. The sex cells, or gametes, have only half the original number of chromosomes. And remember, it's because the paternal and maternal must give to the progeny and therefore make the full pair. Here's an example so you can kind of get an idea of how many chromosomal. This will give you an idea. Here is a table that shows you all the various species and how different they are in regards to how many chromosomes they have and how many chromosomal pairs. For example, human has 46 chromosomes or 23 pairs, whereas an apple has 34 chromosomes or 17 pairs. So as you can see, a fruit fly has only 8 or 4 pairs, and the human is much more complex, and we have higher number of chromosomes. When looking at an organism, we call a complete set of chromosomes the karyotype. So for example, if we're looking at all of the different kinds of chromosomal pairs for an organism, this is for the human. There are 22 autosomes, or chromosomal pairs, and then we also have 1 pair of sex chromosomes. And remember, we said we had 23 pairs of chromosomes, right? And that's because we have 22 autosomal and we have 1 sex chromosome. Together, that makes 23 pairs, or 46 chromosomes. Now, going back, let's take notes on this. An autosome, which I mentioned here as being the 22 that we see here, the 22 sets, they are chromosomes. It is the sum total of all the genes of that organism. For example, we know that the autosomes for humans, we have 22. And remember, I did say that we have one set of non-identical chromosomes. So in order to be a male, you would have to have an X and a Y chromosome, whereas a female would just have to have two of the same, so the X chromosome. Thank you for watching. Please review your notes, make sure you understand them, rewatch the video for any clarifications, bring any questions that you have, and we will review this information in class. Be ready to use and apply this information. Have a good day.